The Sickness of Conformity, Reclaiming Freedom in the Age of the Crowd, Kierkegaard's Warning. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that almost everything you believe, desire, and pursue isn't truly yours. That your opinions, your ambitions, even your deepest sense of self are merely echoes of the collective voice of society. Think about it. How much of what you do each day comes from your genuine, unfiltered individuality, and how much is simply a reflection of what the modern world has constantly told you to be? We're going to dive deep into one of the most unsettling ideas of all, that modern life, in its obsession with conformity, comfort, and mass approval, is quietly destroying our individuality while actively rewarding mediocrity and a profound collective stupidity. By the end of this journey, we'll uncover the most powerful truth of all, one that Søren Kierkegaard himself hinted at, about how to reclaim your inner freedom in a world that increasingly punishes independent thought. Before we go further, take a moment to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who is also questioning the world around them. Because what you'll discover today might completely change how you see yourself, society, and the invisible mechanisms that keep you subdued. The crowd is untruth, the illusion of identity. Let's begin with a question. What does it truly mean to be an individual? For Kierkegaard, the individual was not just a human being living among others. The individual was a truth unto themselves, a person who dares to stand apart, who confronts the absurdity of existence face to face without the cheap comfort of belonging to the crowd. Yet, in modern society, genuine individuality has been replaced by identity, a superficial costume of political opinions, brand affiliations, and virtual personas, all designed specifically for social approval. We curate a self that is optimized for the algorithm. Kierkegaard warned us about this over a century ago. He saw the inevitable rise of what he called the crowd, a faceless collective that dissolves responsibility, consciousness, and truth. In his stark words, the crowd is untruth. He meant that when we surrender to the crowd, we surrender our capacity for authentic thought. We trade profound, difficult truth for convenient consensus and deep conviction for fleeting social convenience. In today's terms, this means scrolling through social media feeds that dictate our desires, following trending topics that define our political and moral worth, and seeking validation through anonymous likes instead of through self-understanding. But here's the tragic irony. The more connected we become, the more disconnected we feel from ourselves. The more we pursue belonging in the collective, the less we understand who we really are. Society tells us that individuality is about being different, but true individuality is not about appearance or superficial rebellion. It's about authentic self-awareness. It's not what you show the world, but what you refuse to compromise inside yourself. The performance of uniqueness. Think of how the modern system rewards conformity disguised as uniqueness. We are constantly told to be ourselves, but only within strict, non-threatening boundaries of acceptability. You can be different, as long as your difference fits a marketable narrative. You can question things, as long as your questions don't threaten the emotional comfort of the majority. Slowly, without realizing it, your individuality becomes a performance, not a reality. A strategy for gaining influence, rather than a genuine expression of your being. Kierkegaard's message was deeply personal and profoundly radical. The individual must stand alone before truth. This solitude is not loneliness, it is courage. It is the absolute refusal to let the crowd define what is meaningful, what is moral, or what is real. But this is precisely what modern life discourages. It teaches us to follow trends, trust the algorithm blindly, and immediately silence our inner doubts with a notification. As we lose touch with that inner voice, we become spectators of our own existence. passive, anxious, and numb. The comfort of stupidity, the algorithmic trap. Modern life is a master illusionist. It sells us the fantasy of infinite freedom while subtly shaping every part of our thinking. It gives us infinite choice, but only within a predefined, safe system. It tells us to be independent, yet viciously punishes those who stray too far from the collective narrative. In this paradox, stupidity becomes a virtue. The less you question, the more you fit in. The more you conform, the more you are rewarded with stability and peace. Kierkegaard saw this long before the internet turned us into brands of ourselves. He understood that the real danger is not in losing information, but in losing depth, the capacity to truly think, to reflect, and to feel without the crowd's constant noisy interference. He warned that the crowd makes us cowardly. It numbs our moral responsibility. It convinces us that if everyone is doing it, then no one is truly guilty. And so here we are, surrounded by manufactured noise, addicted to distraction, and terrifyingly afraid of silence. Because in silence, the illusion breaks. In silence, we are forced to confront our true selves, and that for the majority is unbearable. The very discomfort you feel when you disconnect, when you stop scrolling, when you question, that is your individuality trying to breathe again. The tragedy of the reactive mind. Think about the world we live in today. Everything is designed to keep you busy, not necessarily productive, not truly alive, but constantly occupied. We live in an age where attention has become the most valuable currency, and silence is treated like a threat. Every notification, every trending outrage, every new piece of media demands your reaction. And what happens to a mind that never rests? It loses the ability to think deeply. It becomes reactive, shallow, and utterly dependent on the noise it consumes. Kierkegaard would have called this the tragedy of the reflective age. He described a time when people no longer lived passionately from within, but through reflection, through the mirrors of opinion, through imitation, and through endless comparison. He wrote that a crowd has no hands, but it has many eyes, meaning that the collective doesn't act, it only watches, judges, and enforces consensus. Today, this has become our default state. We watch more than we live. We observe, comment, react, but rarely experience something directly or authentically. We've become experts at pretending to care about everything, yet feeling nothing deeply. The crowd no longer needs to force you to conform. It simply overwhelms you until resistance feels pointless. This is how modern life rewards stupidity. Because stupidity in this sense is not about lack of intelligence, it is about the refusal to think independently. It is the conscious surrendering of your capacity for judgment in exchange for the ultimate comfort of belonging. A thinking individual is inconvenient. A reflective one is often unprofitable. Look at how society praises the illusion of awareness. We are encouraged to have opinions on everything, but discouraged from truly understanding anything deeply. We post slogans about mindfulness while being slaves to distraction. We preach individuality while following the exact same social patterns as everyone else. The result is a collective consciousness that celebrates the comfort of the unexamined life while mocking genuine introspection as arrogance or madness. The sickness unto death, despair, and the self. Kierkegaard saw this collective apathy as a form of despair. He famously said that the greatest sickness is to be in despair over not being oneself. He wasn't talking about mere sadness. He meant the spiritual sickness of self-forgetfulness. When you willingly let society define who you are, you abandon your authentic self. You become a mask that the world approves of. But behind that perfectly curated mask is emptiness. Ask yourself, how many people do you know who are truly, unreservedly themselves? How many live by genuine conviction rather than social convenience? Most of us have learned to silence the inner voice that questions, doubts, or challenges. We've replaced genuine thought with socially acceptable scripts, and the system rewards that silence. The more you follow the algorithm, the more it feeds you what you like. The less you question, the more comfortable life feels. You don't have to think, the system thinks for you. You don't have to reflect, the crowd validates your emotions instantly. This is not freedom, it's sedation. As Aldous Huxley warned, people will come to love their oppression and adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. Kierkegaard's despair meets Huxley's dystopia, and together they describe our contemporary world perfectly. The aesthetic versus ethical life. Kierkegaard contrasted this existence with two possible paths: the aesthetic life and the ethical life. The aesthetic life is the life of distraction, pleasure, and novelty. It is the life of the scroll. The aesthetic man lives for the moment, always chasing the next high, the next trend, the next source of external stimulation. He avoids commitment and responsibility because they limit his options. The aesthetic life keeps you entertained but perpetually empty. The desperate need for constant novelty means you are always running from the one thing you must confront: yourself. This avoidance is the core of modern despair. The aesthetic man fears nothing more than silence and the responsibility of choice. The ethical life, though far more demanding, is the beginning of real freedom. It is where one begins to take responsibility for their choices, for their values, and for seeking authentic meaning. It is the life lived by conviction, not by convenience. So the question becomes, why do so few choose the ethical path? Because awakening hurts. It strips away comfortable illusions. It demands courage. And courage is rare in a world that rewards obedience and ridicules authenticity. The courage to lose oneself, the moment of awakening. To reclaim your individuality in a world that thrives on conformity, you must first confront the uncomfortable truth that most of what feels like yourself has been manufactured for you. The modern world is a grand theater, and most people are simply playing roles written long before they were born. Kierkegaard called this living in inauthentic despair, a quiet, unspoken suffering that comes from living a life that is not truly yours. The first step toward awakening is radical awareness. Awareness means questioning everything, especially the things that make you comfortable. It means asking, what if my success, my happiness, my beliefs are all reflections of what others expect from me? Kierkegaard believed that to truly exist, one must first experience despair, not as something to escape, but as something to transform. Despair, in his philosophy, is the moment you realize you've been living a lie. It is the breakdown that precedes awakening. He wrote that despair is the sickness unto death, but also the beginning of life, because only when the false self collapses can the real self emerge. The pain of that realization is immense, but it's also sacred. It's the moment the individual begins to wake up. This awakening is not glamorous. It's messy, lonely, and disorienting. You begin to see through the illusions that once defined your world: the social games, the false ambitions, the collective stupidity disguised as wisdom. You realize that most people are not free, they are merely busy. That realization distances you from them. You will feel misunderstood. You will be tempted to go back to sleep. Kierkegaard warned that the individual who awakens often feels crucified by the crowd because the awakened person threatens the comfort of the conformists. The crowd doesn't want truths. It wants validation. It will try to pull you back with fear, ridicule, and moral guilt. But this resistance is proof that you're growing beyond its control. The ultimate commitment. The second step toward reclaiming individuality is commitment. Once you've seen through the illusions, you must decide what you will stand for. Modern life trains us to be perpetual observers, to avoid decisive choices. We fear commitment because it limits our options. But Kierkegaard argued that true freedom only emerges when you choose. Without commitment, we drift. With commitment, we anchor. Choosing to live authentically means accepting responsibility for your existence. It means saying, "This is who I am, this is what I believe, and I will live by it even if it costs me approval." This kind of courage terrifies the crowd because the individual who has discovered their own meaning is ungovernable. They cannot be manipulated through fear, envy, or shame. You will pay a price for this freedom. You will lose friends who prefer the illusion. You will encounter ridicule, misunderstanding, and loneliness. Kierkegaard called this the anguish of freedom. Yet, paradoxically, it's in this anguish that joy begins to bloom. Because joy, unlike pleasure, cannot be mass-produced. It arises from authenticity, from knowing that even if the whole world misunderstands you, you have remained true to yourself. That silent, unwavering authenticity is the true revolution modern life fears most. The final leap, self-creation and transcendence. To live as a truly free individual in an unfree world is one of the hardest, most courageous acts a human being can undertake. Kierkegaard knew that society would always pressure the individual to conform, to surrender their will to the comfort of the majority. Yet he also believed that genuine meaning could only be found in the act of standing alone before truth. What does that mean today in our hyper-connected, algorithmic age? It means reclaiming the one thing the system cannot commodify: your inner life. Modern life offers endless substitutes for meaning: entertainment, status, productivity, noise. The only real rebellion left is to think, to feel deeply, and to live consciously. Kierkegaard taught that the highest task of every human being is to become a self. Not a social mask, not a digital identity, but a self that exists in truth. This kind of existence doesn't begin when you gain something. It begins when you strip away everything false. It's the moment you stop asking, "What should I do to be liked?" and start asking, "What must I do to be real?" Practical steps to self-creation, reclaiming silence, the Sabbath of reflection. The system feeds on your distraction. Fight back by setting aside time, daily or weekly, where all devices are off. Cultivate solitude not as isolation, but as nourishment. In silence, you rediscover yourself. The journal as reflection. Externalizing your thoughts through writing forces you to confront the self, preventing the aesthetic life from dominating. It's the act of being your own witness, transforming raw, painful experience into meaning and insight. The courage to choose. Stop living by avoidance. Make decisive choices, even small ones, that align with your deepest, most difficult truth. Commitment is the anchor that pulls you out of the aesthetic drift. Kierkegaard's concept of faith was the final step. Faith, for him, was not blind belief in dogma. It was the courage to trust existence even in the face of absolute uncertainty. It was the leap beyond logic, beyond the crowd, into the vast and terrifying freedom of being fully alive. Psychologist Viktor Frankl echoed this truth. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. This freedom is not given by society, it is discovered within. So what would your life look like if you lived in alignment with your deepest truth? What would you have to let go of? You might lose comfort, you might lose approval, but what you'll gain is authenticity. And authenticity is worth everything. Kierkegaard once said that purity of heart is to will one thing. That one thing is the lived truth of your own existence. When you live with purity of heart, your life ceases to be a performance. You stop seeking meaning in the crowd and start finding it in the quiet dialogue between yourself and the infinite. The stupidity of the world no longer angers you, it saddens you. The conformity of others no longer provokes your ego, it awakens your compassion. You realize that everyone is fighting the same invisible battle, the struggle between fear and freedom. Let this be the final revelation, the most important truth of all. Modern life may try to destroy individuality, but it can only succeed if you consent. No system, no crowd, no ideology can erase the self that dares to think, to feel, and to choose with awareness. The power of individuality lies not in separating from humanity, but in becoming fully human. In refusing to be reduced to a number, a trend, or a label. The world rewards stupidity because stupidity is safe, but life itself rewards authenticity. The courage to think freely, live truthfully, and love deeply despite the chaos. Dare to be the single individual that Kierkegaard spoke of. Because in a time when conformity is celebrated and stupidity is rewarded, to live authentically, to live as yourself, is not only a philosophical act, it is a sacred one.